So I'm going to take you guys around the research farm here, just a little bit outside Columbia, and we're going to see what they're growing. Okay, we're here at the Horticulture and Agroforestry Research Center. Looking around, you can see some plantations and some experimental plots, different landscapes, maybe some storage sheds down there. There were some, it looks like vineyard testing things on the way in. Lots of trees with name tags, of course. Underneath those conifers back there, there's some shiitake mushroom cultivation. So I'm gonna do a little bit of driving around and try not to get stuck in the snow and see some of these things up close. Okay, so this is the first stop. This is the swamp white oak as a food source for wildlife study. And you can see the rows of swamp white oak, and it looks like they're testing the effects of selection on acorn production in a grafted swamp white oak population. So some of these are all the same variety. And then the second part is to develop new sources of swamp white oak trees capable of increased acorn production. So perhaps they're using some seedling swamp white oak to try to increase the amount of acorns that they produce for wildlife. I'm really interested in white oak for acorn production that's actually edible for people. I mean, acorns are edible, but they require a lot of processing. But I've heard of some white oak acorns that actually can be eaten like chestnuts very easily. So I mean, if anyone knows anything about that, I'd love to get more information. Okay, right next to the swamp white oak is the black walnut as a specialty nut crop experiment, and to quantify levels of genetic variation present within this diverse black walnut germplasm collection for commercially important nut and timber traits, and develop new black walnut nut cultivars for use in agroforestry-based planting practices such as alley cropping and silvopasture. And that second one is what I'm interested in. So we're looking at varieties and cultivars that have certain traits that make them more compatible with growing alongside other crops, so that we can start incorporating these trees into the landscape and not have to displace farmland. You can actually incorporate it right in on the farmland. Really cold out here. All right, I'm gonna keep walking to find the next spot. Just a little ways down the road here, we've got some younger trees at the base. They look like only a few years old, and then some 10-year-old trees next door. And this is where I'll likely be doing a lot of work, studying how black walnut genetics move from parents to the offspring, to create some superior varieties of black walnut that might be used again for alley cropping and for agroforestry purposes. In this area, they're testing chestnuts for the best cultivars, and to kind of observe how they grow in Missouri. Trees look about, I'm not that familiar with chestnut, but I'd say around 5 to 10 years old. Wonder if I can take a walk inside. Looks like it's chained up though. Here's an interesting one. This is alley cropping shade screening program. So they have rows of trees next to rows of forage, and they test the effect that the trees have on the forage. And sometimes, I'm not sure how they're running it here, they'll actually have rows where there aren't any trees, but there's just shade cloth over the forage, so you can kind of isolate the competition that's happening between the trees and the forage, and whether that's coming just from the lack of light that the trees cause, or if there's underground competition. So I don't know exactly how they're running it here, but this is really interesting. So we can get more trees on the landscape. Like I was saying, we can get more carbon out of the atmosphere and into the terrestrial pools of the trunks of the trees, and underneath the ground in the soil carbon pools as well. We're now standing under the canopy of a black walnut tree. I can kind of tell because there's kind of more rough bark, and there's kind of that stubby branching pattern. It's not really fine tips at the end of the branching. And of course there's black walnuts on the ground. That's a dead giveaway. And they have a tag on here that says Thomas Meyer, which is a cross. Thomas is very old. Both of these are old varieties of black walnut. And it's one of the many that are out here in this trial. This is the older trees. I think the ones we were looking at in the first video were a little bit younger. Maybe the progeny of these, or just other accessions that the accession means like other trees that were brought in besides the kind of legacy ones that are over here. Okay, this is a grapevine experiment. They're testing different cultivars to evaluate plant performance, fruit quality, and assess the qualities. I don't even know what enological, but viticultural just means the way or the growing of grapes. So it tests the differences between the historical grape varieties and the new ones, specifically here in the Missouri environment. I've got lots of rows. We'd definitely like to do a taste test on all these grapes and see which ones taste the best, and that's something I'm always interested in, even beyond the growing aspect. I'll definitely be doing videos in the future testing all the different black walnut varieties that I can get my hands on. I'm finding which ones have the least amount of like bitter, strong flavor, because I'm not a huge fan of that flavor. So maybe there's certain varieties that don't have as much of that. Okay, thanks for watching. Hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date on new adventures.